Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. Now, as we celebrate Merdeka Day, it's also time to commemorate the anniversary of our Constitution. Our guest today has repeatedly made calls for, quote, a return to the Constitution's forgotten path of moderation, compromise, and compassion. Where have we strayed over the last half a century or more? I'm delighted to welcome on the show today constitutional expert and legal scholar, Professor Emeritus Dr. Shad Saleem Faruqi. Thank you so much for being on the show, Prof Shad. Let me just quickly introduce your many achievements. You are the holder of the Tunku Abdul Rahman Chair at University Malaya, and from 2019 to last June was the holder of the Tun Hussein On Chair at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. Prof Shad, welcome. Selamat Hari Merdeka to you. Let's begin our conversation today with a look at the Constitution. And you've referred to the Constitution not just as a legal document, but you've called it a document of destiny. And I'm just wondering why it is, since particularly in this past few months where we found ourselves in a time of crisis and growing pains as a democracy, why you think it's important that we turn to the Constitution for guidance.
First of all, thank you very much, Melisa and Sharaad, and Merdeka. Greetings to all listeners. I thank you for quoting from the book, Document of Destiny. Yes, that's what I lovingly like to call our Constitution. I agree with you that all democracies suffer from growing pains. And certainly we are going through such a painful period. But I would like to assure your listeners that this is not unique to Malaysia. Our problem is that for 61 years, we were psychologically conditioned to a system of guided democracy in which the Barisan Nasional was repeatedly returned to power with 60% and once even 91% of the seats in the Dewan Raad. 60% to 91% of the seats in the Dewan Raad. Suddenly, that changed in 2018, and many citizens are unable to cope with the change. Since 2020 especially, our system has taken a hard knock due to the problem of party hopping and hung parliaments. But I assure you that we shall overcome. I say that because when I look at comparative constitutional law, I note that in 2019, there were 13 minority governments in the world due to hung parliaments. They overcame their instability, and so can we. Now, coming to your question, Melisa, should we turn to our Constitution in times of crises? Or as some people say, should we find extra constitutional, rational, workable, utilitarian solutions? My view of that is that the Constitution is the foundation of our legal system. It is the supreme law of the land. It applies in times of peace and in times of crises. In fact, the Perlembagan in Articles 149 to 151 allows for situations of subversion and emergency. So the Constitution should apply in good times as well as bad times. If anyone sidesteps the Constitution in times of crises for a good cause, there is a likelihood that other people will disobey the Constitution for other aims that they regard as noble. So I would recommend that we show a duty of fidelity to the Constitution at all times. But having said that, Melisa, I wish to offer one qualification. The Constitution is not mere black letter rules. It includes principles, doctrines, for example, separation of powers, rule of law, independence of the judiciary, accountable government. And these doctrines are part of the heart and soul of the government, of the Constitution. The Constitution is also enriched by constitutional conventions or rules of political ethics that can provide some guidance in areas where written law is silent. But at the end of the day, all governmental action must be founded and grounded in the Constitution.
Professor Shad, you recently said that the Constitution has survived, but constitutionalism is weak. Could you help us understand what that distinction is between constitutionalism and the Constitution?
Yes. Sharaad, about 180 countries of the world have constitutions. Apartheid South Africa had a constitution. Adolf Hitler's Germany had a constitution. But that constitution was a brutal document which promoted genocide or apartheid and violations of human rights. Constitutionalism is a concept which says that it's not enough to have legality. You must have just legality. You must safeguard fundamental rights. You must protect the dignity of human beings. There must be some other substantive content to your constitutional document. You must have independent judiciary. You must have remedies where wrongs are committed. So constitutionalism is a rich, substantive concept. It means that along with a supreme law, the law must be enriched with some basic values. And I just want to alert you on this. These values are dynamic. At one time, we were talking only about political and civil liberties. Now we are talking of socio-economic liberties and more. We are talking of rights of future generations. We are talking of sustainability. So the Constitution actually is a growing document. Thank you.
I really love that. I love that it is ever changing and evolving for the many weaknesses that it may have, but it is also a living document, a growing document. Can we talk a little bit about, you mentioned values, and at the beginning of the show I cited a quote from you that you considered the Constitution as there's a forgotten path of the Constitution that is one of moderation, compromise, and compassion. And I wanted to ask you, are those the values that you found espoused in our Constitution? And why do you think we have forgotten it? What has caused us to stray from this path, Professor Shad?
Yes. If I may request you, let me divide that into two parts. First of all, how are the special provisions in the Constitution seeking to protect our diversity and there is shared destiny? Let me say this, that actually all constitutions of the world are in some respects balancing acts. They seek to reconcile what some people may say are irreconcilable conflict of interests. In Malaya, later Malaysia, we sought to balance the old with the new, the indigenous with the imported, the existentialist realities of a feudal, deeply divided society with the lofty dreams of equality, unity in diversity, and constitutionalism. The interests of the colonial masters, of the Malay rulers, of the Malay majority, and the non-Malay minorities had to be balanced. The forefathers of our Constitution, especially Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra Al-Haj, realized that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the resolution of conflicts in a peaceful way, and the creation of conditions that make violence unnecessary. And I think that's what they set about to achieve, to create those conditions where conflict and violence would be unnecessary, while preserving many features of the Malay archipelago. The alliance coalition Tunku Abdul Rahman headed embraced many provisions suitable for our dazzling diversity. For example, citizenship is granted on a non-ethnic and non-regional basis. The electoral process permits all communities an equal right to vote and to seek elective office. The chapter on fundamental liberties grants fundamental liberties to all irrespective of race, religion, or region. At the federal level, whatever public opinion may say, the Constitution says that the membership of the judiciary, cabinet, parliament, public services, and the special commissions under the Constitution are open to all, irrespective of race or religion. Education is free at the primary and secondary level and is open to all. Though Islam is the religion of the Federation, the Sharia does not apply to non-Muslims. All religious communities are allowed to profess and practice their faiths in peace and harmony. May I point out, Melissa and Sharaad, in some countries, there is an official list of permitted religions. Malaysia did not do that. We left it open. All religions may be practiced in peace and harmony. And I think that was beautiful because there is now no need to leave out some and include other religions. Coming to Bahasa Melayu, it's the national language, but there is protection for the formal study in schools of other languages. You know, if 15 kids in a school ask for a language to be taught, it is the duty of the school to try to find facilities for these 15 kids. Article 152, Clause 1. 152 is about Bahasa Melayu. It empowers the federal and state governments to preserve and sustain the use and study of the language of any other community. Now, Article 152, Clause 1 is the basis for the Education Act's provision on national type of vernacular schools. Though Article 89 provides for Malay reserves, it also says no non-Malay land shall be appropriated for Malay reserves, and that if any land is reserved for Malays, an equivalent amount shall be opened up for general alienation. The spirit of give and take between the races, regions, and religions is specially applicable to Sabah and Sarawak since 1963. When Sabah Sarawak federated with Malaya to constitute the new and more diverse nation of Malaysia, 37 new articles were inserted in our constitution to deal with their special rights. And nearly 89 other articles were amended to accommodate Sabah Sarawak's special aspirations. Finally, sorry, go ahead.
So, Professor, you know, it's a
Yes.
wonderful list of, I think, both the aspirations and the dreams of many Malaysians. And yet, we've had political authoritarianism, we've had political majoritarianism and cultural majoritarianism in the country. How did the Constitution allow this?
Well, the Constitution doesn't really allow it. I think what has happened is that administratively and politically, things have happened which have departed from the aspirations of the Constitution. The spirit of the Constitution was moderation, compassion, and compromise, as Melissa beautifully pointed out. But somehow we have forgotten that path. As I look back, I remember that for several decades after Merdeka, Malaysia was regarded as an exemplar of an Asian society where democracy and development can go hand in hand, religion and secularism can coexist, various races, regions, religions can constitute a beautiful mosaic. But we have regressed due to a calculus of factors. There are many factors. I'll just enumerate a few of them. First of all, Sharaad, there is no constitutional literacy. Whether in primary, secondary, university, whether in Intan or in Ilkap, there is no special course on the basic features of our Constitution. And may I say this to you, I know this will sound scandalous. One can become a lawyer or a judge in this country with a foreign degree, not having studied the Malaysian Constitution for a single day. There is no bridging course required before joining the legal profession a bridging course in the Malaysian constitution. So constitutional literacy, Sharaad, is very weak, especially of the carefully crafted ethnic compromises of 1957 and 1963. Then I think the 1965 separation from Singapore has left a bitter legacy, and there are unspoken fears and suspicions. The tragic events of 1969 reshaped political and administrative thinking on intercommunal matters. And I think this is the point you were making. Ethnicity has taken a central place in government policies and programs. However, please do note that on inter-ethnic relations, no significant changes were made to the constitution despite the racial riots of 1969. When Parliament came back in 1971, February 20th, 71, no specific or significant changes were made to the ethnic compromises of the 57 Charter. Then, Sharaad, since the 80s, the curriculum for education at all levels has been infused with a strong religious and ethnic content. This has polarized the population. National schools have become unattractive to non-Malays. And this is not known that actually it's because the national schools have become like semi-religious schools that vernacular education has become revived, which was dwindling in the 70s and 80s actually. I ask myself sometimes the way kids are now going either to national schools or to vernacular schools, and there is no mingling. I ask myself, if kids do not learn together, how will they later live together? Then, since the 70s, there has been a progressive replacement of the Malay culture of moderation, tolerance, and inclusiveness, and recognition of women's rights by a very conservative version of Islam imported from abroad, which has now influenced all sectors of society. We must note, however, that from time to time, there were cross currents of competing concepts like Islam Hadari, One Malaysia, Bangsa Malaysia, but sadly they didn't last long. The pull of identity politics remains very strong. And finally, there has been a very sad failure of our political and our religious leaders to condemn hate speech and racial and religious bigotry, with some exceptions, of course. Extremism has become mainstream, and tolerance and moderation are frowned upon. The concepts of pluralism and tolerance and moderation have been given negative connotations. Now, whether this tide of intolerance can be reversed remains to be seen. What I want to say to Sharaad is this: the law remains pretty much the same as in 57 and 63, but politics has changed. The bureaucracy has been politicized. I think firm leadership can change things. Firm leadership is needed. I want to end by quoting Jesse Jackson. He said, "Leaders of substance do not follow opinion polls. They mold opinion, not with guns or dollars or position, but with the power of their souls." Thank you.
Professor Shad, that was wonderfully said, and I want to look at, because we're celebrating Merdeka today, 1957, an important date in Malaya's history. But I also want to look at 1963 and the role the Constitution played in those 6 years. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that shaped our history as a nation?
Yes. Yes, actually, when Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore federalized with Malaya to constitute the bigger and much more diverse nation, clearly there was a deliberate design to give to Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore recognition of their uniqueness, their racial, religious, linguistic, customary uniqueness. And as I mentioned earlier, nearly 89 articles of the Constitution were realigned, were amended. 30 plus new articles were added. For example, Melisa, Malay reserve land doesn't apply in Sabah Sarawak. We have power of the federal government to provide uniform laws on local government, on land. That power of the federal government doesn't apply in Sabah Sarawak. So Sabah Sarawak have special legislative, executive, judicial, and financial powers. Now, in general, however, every federal system is an institutionalized form of pluralism with a territorial dimension. What was achieved in Malaya in 57 in terms of pluralism has been given a territorial dimension when Sabah Sarawak joined. Federalism involves the sharing of executive, legislative, judicial, and financial powers between the central government and the regions. Federalism involves the recognition of partial autonomy. And if any of the regions like Sabah Sarawak have significant differences from the rest of the country, they are given special autonomy and ironclad safeguards that autonomy will not be destroyed by the federal government in enumerated areas. For example, the Sabah Sarawak constitutions and their rights cannot be amended by the federal government without the consent of the Yangdi Pertua Negeri of Sabah Sarawak. So in some respects, Melisa, a federal system is an attempt to achieve unity in diversity. However, the darker side of federalism is this, that the challenges of federalism are that there will be disputes between the federal and state governments, and sometimes between the state governments themselves. Differences over petroleum, for example, have led to the breakup of nations like Sudan. At one time, Nigeria had problem with Biafra. So federalism is both a means of uniting disparate regions, finding that which unites us and accepting that which is different. And federalism, sadly, is also a potential source of conflict over a host of issues. Malaysian federalism has generally been peaceful, and I'm hopeful that Sabah Sarawak's unhappiness at many issues, justified unhappiness at many issues, will be resolved with further dialogue and discussion.
Professor Shad, very quickly, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, but how does the Constitution address the very important issue of governance and competent governance and governance, especially in a federation, which makes governance quite complex and policy formulation quite complex? How does it, or is it silent on the question of competence in government and good governance in the 21st century?
Well, Sharaad, we are a parliamentary system of government whereby actually the Prime Minister and the Cabinet must come from Parliament. The Prime Minister from the Dewan Rakyat, the rest of the members from Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. So in that respect, there is an institutional limitation. The Prime Minister's talent pool is limited to Parliament, unlike the President of the USA, who can actually choose his cabinet from all over the nation. But there is a flexibility. The Prime Minister could appoint senators and take them into the cabinet, but there is certainly no problem about a competent civil service, a competent police force, a competent health service. Article 153 has, in some respects, prevented this from happening. But I just want to mention this to you, that within Article 153, that is special position of the Malays and the natives of Sabah Sarawak, there is actually tremendous potential. Some of you override Article 136. It says, all persons of whatever race in the same grade in the service of the Federation shall, subject to the terms and conditions of their employment, be treated impartially. So see, that's the Constitution. 153 allows quotas and reservations, But 136 says no discrimination. So if you read the two together, what it means is that quotas and reservations are permitted at entry point, but once a person is in the public service, he should be treated equally. So in my personal view, there is nothing actually to prevent the government by showing fidelity to 153 and at the same time ensuring that the nation is led by competent public servants and members of the police and armed forces, etc. Thank you.
All right. Professor Shad, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and we want to thank you so much for being on the show. That was constitutional scholar Professor Shad Saleem Faruqi reminding us about the spirit, the principles, and the values of our Constitution this Merdeka Day. That wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Selamat Hari Merdeka and good night.